He laughed, he mocked, and he mentioned Pieter Groenewald. That's how an Afrikaner man's video has gone viral across South Africa following the explosive ruling against Julius Malema in his latest hate speech case. But what looks like a moment of light-hearted mockery has opened the floodgates on some of the country's most heated debates: race, politics, and the power of the courts. The Equality Court's ruling against Malema was always going to be controversial. As leader of the economic freedom fighters, Malema has made a career out of firebrand statements, many of which flirt dangerously close with what the law defines as hate speech. For his supporters, these words are revolutionary, an expression of frustration against an unjust system. For his critics, they are dangerous, divisive, and reckless. When the ruling came down, it immediately sent shockwaves through political circles. But it was the reaction on the streets and on social media that turned the moment into something bigger. One Afrikaner man, whose video quickly spread across platforms, mocked Malema's predicament with a mix of humor and disdain. In his commentary, he didn't just ridicule the EFF leader, he went further, bringing in Pieter Groenewald, leader of the Freedom Front Plus, suggesting that Malema's downfall was poetic justice in the face of Afrikaner resistance. The video struck a chord, not just because of the mockery, but because it highlighted how divided South Africans remain when it comes to Malema. For some, the mocker was simply saying out loud what many feel privately, that Malema's politics have finally caught up with him. For others, it felt like rubbing salt into wounds that are far from healed. Pieter Groenewald's mention in the mockery is no accident. As the head of the FF+, Groenewald has often been on the opposite side of Malema in political and racial debates. The two men represent drastically different constituencies and worldviews. To Afrikaners who feel increasingly alienated in a changing South Africa, Groenewald is a defender of their culture and rights. To Malema's supporters, he is the very embodiment of privilege and resistance to transformation. That's why hearing Groenewald's name in the same breath as Malema's humiliation added an extra sting to the video. But what does this moment really mean for South Africa? On the surface, it's easy to dismiss it as just another round of political theater. Malema loses in court, opponents mock him, and the news cycle moves on. Yet dig deeper, and you'll see that these moments chip away at the fragile trust between communities. When court rulings are celebrated through ridicule rather than respected through reason, they risk fueling more division than unity. Malema himself has remained defiant, as he always does. He insists that the ruling is part of a broader attempt to silence revolutionary voices and to criminalize black anger. His base will likely agree, doubling down on the idea that Malema is a target of a biased system. But for those who oppose him, this ruling is seen as overdue justice, finally putting boundaries on a politician who has too often tested the limits of free speech. The real test, however, lies in what happens next. Will this ruling and the public mockery that followed weaken Malema's political standing? Or will it strengthen his narrative as a persecuted revolutionary? History suggests the latter. Malema has always thrived in controversy, using every setback to fire up his supporters even more. The mockery from the Afrikaner man may amuse many, but for Malema's followers, it will likely deepen their loyalty. This is the paradox of South African politics. Every victory for one side often fuels anger and resistance on the other. The Equality Court ruling and the viral mockery that followed may seem small in the grand scheme of things, but they are part of a bigger pattern, a cycle of division, ridicule, and backlash that keeps the nation locked in political conflict. South Africa, the question is this: are we laughing at a politician, or are we laughing at ourselves? When ridicule replaces dialogue, and mockery becomes the loudest voice in the room, the nation risks losing sight of what really matters, building a future where differences don't always mean division. So, what do you think? Was this Afrikaner man's mockery a justified reaction to Malema's ruling, or was it crossing the line into fueling more hatred? Drop your thoughts below, let's get into the debate, and as always, Keep watching Truth Untold for the stories behind the headlines.